panel discussion. No. I have the unenviable position of being the only person standing between you and lunch. So we're going to get moving on this. I also have to follow Greg, who of course has great graphics, so bear with my graphics. And yes, I am employed by Ohio State University, but it's part of the Joint Fire Science Program, federal funding for these fire science exchanges, and that's where the grants run through at Ohio State University. So let's get into the talk. So we're going to talk mostly about growing season fire. So what is it? And I'm so glad John started his talk, and he mentioned craft beers. And isn't it great how fire and beer go together? So, but just like there's all types of craft beers, all different flavors and seasonal beers, that's what growing season fire is, and dormant season fire. There's all different fire effects. You're going to get some that you like, some that you don't. But you got to try all these, right? Just like you got to try a lot of different fire in order to see what works and what doesn't. So, but growing season fire is not a silver bullet. And I've been accused of that because I've done a lot with growing season fire. People are like, oh, well, that seems to work. Well, no, it's not the only answer. What it does is it opens up that burn window. So you can compare dormant season and growing season, and within growing season, it just gives you a lot more options potentially. So this slide here depicts why, I believe at least, I can stand up here and pontificate about growing season burns. Okay, because I worked with the Michigan chapter of the Nature Conservancy for about 18 years. I was a land steward and fire manager. We did a lot of research burns, a lot of growing season burns. So not what I'm showing right here, there's 384 burns that we have actually good monitoring data. We got about another 2/3 that we employed and did burns, but it was either they worked or they didn't work. So a lot of what I'm basing on is the monitoring data, not the, hey, we went out and burned and this is what happened. If you work for the Conservancy or work with the Conservancy, you know that we do a lot of ecological burning. Most of our burns involve threatened and endangered species, so of course that adds another whole complexity to doing burning. You can see the range in size. It was anywhere from 10 acres up to 600 acres for these monitored burns. And again, small acres have to do mostly with the teeny species or kind of restoring, versus once we were able to get into either larger landscapes or moving more from restoration to maintenance phase, we could get into the larger acres. I have the April and October highlighted. In April, you'll notice there's nothing in March, at least for the monitored burns. Well, that's an artifact of we usually didn't get seasonals on until about March. So we didn't have the crew to do much in the way of burning in March. So I can't really talk too much about that dormant season as far as the monitoring data. Anybody want to hazard a guess with October? Why there's not as many burns there monitored? No? Students went back to college. That's part of it. We could still get crews. Come on, it's hunting season. I'm going to be up in the damn tree stand. I just did all this burning through the year. I'm done with it. So the artifact is, yeah, there's a bias towards not enough information for the October, but we're going to work with it. All right, so the monitoring and research, Brian Stern is going to talk a lot more about monitoring, but we did photo monitoring, veg transect, FQIs is not on here, rare butterfly surveys, brown transects, course level metrics, did fire behavior for all this. We also had some grad student research projects on small mammals, Massasauga and box turtles. So we got a lot of kind of data taking a look at it. And again, I'm glad that both John and Greg just referenced this. The reason for this picture is we're talking about jack pine barrens or oak pine barrens, but the structure is not necessarily in that dominant tree. It's here. It's in the grasses, sedges, forbs. Oops. And in the forbs. So from the Conservancy perspective, when we were doing this, we were looking at the ecosystem as a whole and trying to get that diversity back. Can anybody pick out the picture with fire in it? Yeah, with the lupin. So, and this is also occupied kernel blue habitat. So we are burning with federally endangered butterfly when they're flying. So we had to obviously get all kinds of Fish and Wildlife Service permits. that actually may be one of the best times to burn, is what we found, in order to minimize impact on the butterflies locally. So if we move into other species too, not just thinking about the floristic qualities, again, looking at a variety of different herps, or we move into game species. We had a lot of questions about how this affects negatively or positively with game species. As you get into bird nesting and all that. How many people are burn bosses here? Okay, so when you get to doing the burn the day of, do you really care what the fire effects are going to be? I know personally for me, the day of the burn, this is what I was worried about. I wanted to keep that fire in the box, keep the crew safe and everything else. So you're figuring out those fire effects weeks, months, years in advance, because you don't want to let these guys get out of the box, right? Because then they run amok. So if you focus too much on how to, though, this is what happens. I think this is a great Fireside comic, because just because we call it a fire-dependent system doesn't mean you just throw fire at it and everything's going to be good, all right? So it really is getting to this. The goal is not the fire. I like seeing flames. I love seeing fire. But really, it's the fire effects. So in a lot of the burns we did, we are letting the fire effects lead us to the next burn and the next burn and what we are seeing. And that's why you also need to monitor well. So the overall goal for us was ecological restoration or ecological resilience too. And it really was the repeated burns. So again, Greg mentioned, it's not just the one-time burn. It's that repeated burns, same sites, different seasons. But also this last bullet point, you know that no matter what we do, there's going to be positive or negative effects. So it's balancing those out. Because with growing season burns or dormant season burns, you can have negative effects and positive effects. You need to be able to be prepared to articulate what the good is and what the bad is and what the big goal is for each objective. So I'll throw this out. I'm a wildlife biologist for training. How many people are ecologists or biologists in here? Okay. Has anybody ever told somebody this or been told this? Well, don't burn during this time because you're going to maybe kill the species directly. Yep. But from a biologist perspective, I'm going to go to this. Because these species, whether they're plant or animal, occur in fire-dependent systems. Somehow they evolved with that. We know fire is going to kill them directly. But how do we minimize impact of those species in order to gain more habitat back or allow more landscape scale thinking? So, you know, again, looking at growing season burn, yes, we are going to have direct effect or indirect effect on animals. The question is, can we minimize that? So if you go from thinking about the big picture goal to individual burns, these might be potential objectives. You might have one main objective for burn. Not any of these are necessarily wrong. You might want to make the unit black. It might be the first time you're actually in that area in a fire-dependent system, and the goal is less for the fire effects. The goal is maybe to get the local landowners around comfortable with fire. Simple as that. So you might have to forego fire effects initially to get your burn program established locally. Then you might move into, hey, what's the next big thing for the next burn? Do we need to reduce shrubs? Do we need to thin the canopy? You know, are we depauperate with forbs? Do we need to be looking at that? Do we have heavy invasives? Do we need to knock that back? So it's really the building of these objectives for each burn into the repeated burns that is where you start to get to that ecosystem resilience. And again, our toolbox here is not real diverse. I mean, we have mechanical, chemical, biological, fire, maybe water sometimes. So we got to make the most use of how we combine all this. So thinking from that perspective, let's move to the why. And if we're looking at the effects on flora and fauna, this is how I approached it. We wanted to figure out what the effects we needed were. So if we're trying to knock back an invasive species, how do we do that with fire? If we're trying to promote a teeny plant species or animal species, what do we need to do? So we backtrack that then. Therefore, what kind of fire severity and fire intensity do we need? Therefore, what type of fire weather and fire behavior do we need to achieve that? And that's when we moved into the how. All right. Can we do this with a backfire, a head fire? What type of rate of spread do we need? What type of, you know, how do we factor in wind and slope effects? So again, that's a cool picture, right? That isn't. Hardly see the flames. but who's to say which one's good, which one's bad? It's the effects you get. So it really comes down to the, and I'll go back to that, we didn't lose a person here, that's just for perspective. So it really comes down to residence time and heat output at the right time. You can, the candle's a great example of that. If you hold your hand over that, you're going to get hot, even though it's not a lot of heat output initially. So if we move from the traditional burn windows of spring and fall season, we get into that growing season. And we're really thinking about phenology and overlap. That's why I have these overlaps. Because we know by month, we're still going to have phenological differences year to year. So it's really looking at generality. And here's all the systems we did growing season burns in. So the ones I listed are for the oak pine barren and the jack pine, but we also did stuff in prairie fen, music prairie, so on. And the most success we had, or the best success we had with achieving those fire effects, was always in that late dormant season or moving into September, but through that time period. And then again, if you're looking at this is where you get into different months within. So our effects in April were potentially different than in August or September, and these are all actual fire pictures. And you see fire there, and you're like, wow, that's really happening? You know, when you first start doing this, when it's green, it's like, man, it's really burning. We also had this range, again, looking at that. A broad range in temperatures, a broad range of relative humidity, and it really factored in to the depth moisture code and the drought code. And thinking about this, the phenological stage, if you're burning during that dormant season, yeah, it might be great for biomass removal, but if you really want to have positive or negative effects on various plants, you got to be hitting them during that leaf out, flowering, fruiting stage. And you're also dealing with that lower soil moisture, especially with the barrens when you think about it. We typically do have lower soil moisture almost any time. So less insulating ability. So here it kind of gets into the guts when we rolled all this together. If we burned just in that April and May window consistently, and again, this was based in Michigan, you know, we would favor warm season, not favor cool season grasses. We would knock the teeth out of the forbs early and mid, so we would not have much of that diversity. We'd do fine with the late flowering forbs. So if we wanted to boost that diversity, we could not just focus on April, May. We need to shake it up and move our burns at different times. Sometimes June, sometimes August, sometimes May, sometimes April, so on. And then we could boost that diversity by breaking up the dominance, and that's why I have it highlighted up there, so that you're not favoring any one suite of species. Anybody want to hazard a guess why, for us, the legumes, it didn't matter when the heck we burned? Nitrogen fixers, they don't really care. They like disturbance. That's all we could figure out. We never had any issues with it. If we flip this around and go into invasives, if you focus on just those dormant season burns and you have invasives in the system, you're just going to piss them off. That's all you're going to do. They're going to love that. So for us, if we were using purely fire or if we were doing a combination with other techniques, mechanical or chemical, those growing season burns, we really could impact most of the invasives. There are a couple that are fire positive, and then you got to use different techniques with those. But for at least these species, or competitive ones like Pennsylvania sedge, kind of that growing season window worked well. So wrapping it all up, native plant diversity, we were able to increase. These species, we didn't negatively impact them. We actually created more habitat. We were able to reduce our non-native species, increase our resilience. If we hit jack pine, just throwing this out, thinking of non-fire effects, but thinking from risk perspective, and it was brought up in a couple other talks. I was not the burn boss who was going to sit out there in April and May and try to do fires in jack pine. We just didn't have the capacity to deal with that potential. It was too high a risk. But if we were to burn when that needle moisture was coming up and actually the starch content was changing, where the jack pine was less explosive, we could reduce that explosive nature. And if they did spot, they were spotting into green fuel essentially, which had a much slower rate of spread, so we really could pick that up. Plus, we also got great fire effects from doing it then. So I kept this in there. My daughter did this similar. She loves smiley faces. It's about a decade ago, and she said, "Dad, isn't this what you're doing?" I said, "Pretty much." So if you do just dormant season or just growing season, you're okay. If you kind of combine them, you get happier, and if you do repeated burns, the system is much happier. So just real quick, here's just a photo example where we move from mostly oak leaf litter, really low diversity to high diversity. Of course, on the last picture, we got into a lot of bracken fern. You can't see the rest of the diversity, so you come up with another suite of problems potentially. We never had any problems getting oak back with all those repeated burns. Never. In fact, it became an issue of going, maybe these aren't really barren sites. These are becoming so rich, they're more savanna. Do we maybe just consider it oak forest or a later stage of the barren site? And maple. Maple in Michigan, red maple is a big problem. The picture here for you, it's on the right. That's if you do it too early, just resprouts like crazy. If we hit it on the left, when we hit it when they were leafed out or throughout that growing season, we could really knock that maple back. That's it.